Welcome to the Infotagion podcast, hosted by me, Damian Collins. In this series, we're going inside Europe, looking at how social media is impacting on politics and public discourse in different nations. And in this show, we'll be focused on Germany ahead of its important federal elections in September. For the show, I'll be joined by Carolyn Schwartz, the writer and journalist, Felix Kart from Reset Tech in Germany, and Lisa Marie Neudert from the Oxford Internet Institute, as we discuss the role of social media campaigning and disinformation ahead of the German elections. Carolyn, this is a really important election in Germany, the first one without Angela Merkel as the lead candidate for the CDU. There will be a new chancellor. And looking at the opinion polls, the main parties probably receiving the smallest share of the vote they've ever received in an election combined. Now, what role do you think that social media has played in the election campaign so far? And do you think there's evidence of the importance and strength of social media campaigning, but also interference and disinformation campaigns as well?
I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic still, so social media is, for many of the candidates, all they have, except for some outside campaign rallies and stuff. But social media is important, and we've been living online for over a year now, so it is what we have, and we see that the campaigning takes place heavily online with dirty campaigning, which we've seen in 2017. It's happening again too, and I mean, one thing that's changed is just that we do have a third candidate with a chance of being chancellor, which is what changed and what changed the polls. So we do have three parties which have like an equal share of chances of becoming chancellor and the ruling party.
And do you think that's changed the character of the election because the outcome is so uncertain?
Yes, it has. I mean, I know many people who are not sure who to vote for yet because things have changed with the Green Party having chances of becoming the ruling party and being in a government coalition. That has definitely changed, but there's all kinds of changes that have taken place. For example, the pandemic. There's more awareness of climate change in Germany than it was 4 years ago. So there's all kinds of factors contributing here.
And I mean, Felix, you've done a lot of work looking at where people get information from, the role of disinformation in shaping debates on public policy, both during the pandemic and in other times as well. Do you think that in this federal election that there are concerted efforts through disinformation to mislead voters, to suppress voters, make it less likely they may want to come out and vote, rather than necessarily persuading them to vote for a different candidate?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. As Carolyn just said, I mean, obviously this election campaign is more digital than previous ones, just because there's no street campaigning, basically. In addition, though, there's a whole range of actors who have interests in shaping the political constellations, the political direction of post-Merkel Germany. And there are quite a few, both domestic and foreign, who have very strong interest in preventing a green-led government. And if we look at Russia, for instance, I mean, they have been Russian state media. There's also evidence of covert Russian steered networks. They have been actively distributing disinfo in Germany for months now. Previously, mostly focused on the pandemic, I would say. In recent months, also very much targeting the Green candidate directly. Obviously, Russia doesn't want a green government because the Greens are the most assertive when it comes to any Russia policy and also energy policy, as you know. I think it's way too early to say if that has had any significant influence on the polls, and I'm not sure if there's any empirical research design that could ever answer such a question conclusively. But it's definitely been observable, and in recent weeks, and I think Caroline can talk about that as well. We have seen surges as well in disinformation around the election process itself, which is quite worrying in my view, coming both from domestic sources around the AfD, the far right party, and conspiratorial groups, but also nourished by Russian propaganda. In the attempt to sow doubts about the integrity of the election, the absentee ballot, voting by mail, basically. And to my huge surprise, these narratives, I would call them conspiracy theories, have even been propagated by some of Germany's biggest publishers, Axel Springer and Bild.
So that sounds similar to what we saw in America about disinformation around the electoral process itself.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. I think, as always, the key goal is to undermine trust in democracy, to polarize and divide society, and attacking democracy's core institution and election, of course, makes perfect sense in that regard.
Now, Lisa Maria, you've studied these issues at the Oxford Internet Institute. I mean, how do you feel the disinformation that around the election in Germany at the moment compares to things you've seen in the past, or how would you compare sort of the way social media works in politics in Germany, maybe with other countries as well?
Mm-hmm. So currently, I would say for the case of the German federal elections, there's three things that I'm concerned about. I think on the one hand, we see a lot of very pro-FD information sprinkled in with lots of disinformation that is coming on the one hand from the party itself, from party supporters, but then also, for example, from Russian state-sponsored media. Then Felix and Carolyn already mentioned it. We see lots of disinformation around the integrity of the elections. So we see narratives that are questioning in advance whether the ballot, whether the election process will actually be will have integrity. And then something that we've seen in other countries is that after elections have happened, we see candidates, we see social media groups, we see state-sponsored media questioning whether the process was actually legal, whether all votes have counted as they should have counted, whether all of the votes have been counted. That is something that we're seeing also amplified by mainstream media in Germany. And then the third component that I'm concerned about is the hate that is disseminated towards individual candidates, towards individual parties. I think especially the Green Party candidate, Annalena Baerbock, has experienced a lot of hate on social media. This has been quite prevalent across Facebook, but also across Telegram, for example. Other candidates like Armin Laschet and Olaf Scholz are also on the receiving end of that a little bit, but nowhere near to the extent that Annalena Baerbock is.
And do you think it's shaping what people think about the election? Is this having an impact? Do you think is it changing people's attitudes? Is it moving the opinion polls?
Well, that's always a difficult question to say because, to be honest, without the data from the social media platforms of who's actually being exposed to this type of information, it's very hard to design any sort of study that would look into the effects that this information is having. I would say that just over the past couple of months, certainly a lot has happened when we're looking into the polls. We first had Annalena Baerbock as a very celebrated candidate. People were very excited about her and her candidacy. Now she has plummeted in the polls. For the first time in history, CDU-CSU is polling at an absolutely historical low, with the SPD now taking the lead in the last couple of weeks. But there are a lot of things that have happened over the past couple of weeks. We've had floodings here in July. We, of course, had COVID. We have had the Afghanistan crisis now, which is also something that is very much on people's minds. So we've had a lot of big events and shifts over the past couple of weeks that had an impact on discourse.
Yeah, I mean, do you think? Carolyn, do you think that the role that, say, social media plays now as a source of information, but also an easy platform for people to run campaigns and promote ideas and connect people together? Do you think that that's changing the character of politics in Germany? Do you think that has made it more possible for minority parties and maybe more extreme parties to capture attention in a way that they couldn't do before?
I mean, this hasn't started with COVID or even a year before. It started with pretty much the AfD, but with far right parties in the 1990s, which moved online before all the others did in Germany. And the AfD is still receives the most interactions on most social networks, and that hasn't changed much. The only thing that has changed is that they are lower, like scoring lower in polls, and nothing has really changed in the past weeks, which is interesting to see. But one thing we can see is, for example, there is a new party called Die Basis, which is a party made up of protagonists of the COVID denier movement in Germany. And they will probably not move into parliament because we have a threshold of 5% of the votes to move into parliament. So that is not really an option, but they still have a lot of followers online and they do get a lot of coverage in these spaces. And it's interesting to see because after the recent state elections in Sachsen-Anhalt, they also had candidates running there. And after the election, they said there was election fraud. And this is a theme they have often covered in many of their channels. So I think this is going to become a thing after the election this time as well, on the state level or federal level.
Felix, you mentioned earlier that a lot of social media disinformation principally seeks to divide people, to widen divides in society, make people angry with each other. We've seen that around the world. I mean, is that reflected in what you've seen in Germany in these sort of weeks and months leading up to the election? And are there any particular, apart from the targeting of the Green Party, are there any particular types of campaigns that have been run that have been particularly aggressive?
So I think there has probably been shady campaigning on all parts of the political spectrum. And actually, a poll we conducted, a representative one, revealed that I think it was about 2/3 of German internet users want a less aggressive campaign, that they basically found this election campaign too aggressive. And that's quite noteworthy in a country with a political culture that is usually so consensus driven and by far not as partisan and laden as US or UK campaigning. I am personally not so worried about AfD's poll results. I don't think this is the variable or the metric that we should be looking at. What I find worrying is indeed the prevalence of misinformation, disinformation. We have New York University came out with a study the other day revealing that I think what was it that posts on Facebook containing misinformation ahead of the election, the US election, received 6 times more engagement than factual news coverage. We don't have such results for Germany yet, but preliminary analysis indicates that we would probably see different results. No, sorry, not different results, but the same kinds of results here in Germany. So I find that quite worrying. And what I'm really trying to observe rather than AfD's results is the extent to which digitally amplified misinformation distorts and shifts and undermines the quality of democratic discourse as such, beyond now certain far-right echo chambers. And for me, the question is really, will it in Germany soon also be okay to say that for a normal mainstream politician to claim that climate change isn't happening, to claim that the election is rigged, to make all these these claims for which there is absolutely no factual basis or scientific evidence, as we're seeing it in the US, maybe to some extent in the UK. And that's for me a much more worrying parameter, so to say, than just AfD polling results.
And do you think just climate change has come up quite a bit in the discussion so far? Has that become, do you think, the sort of what the Americans would call the kind of wedge issue of this campaign? It's a topic which people have different opinions on. There is clear science on, but some of it is but some people dispute it. Do you think that has become the kind of the central issue around which division is being created?
I think it's a major campaign issue. So all of the parties basically have something in their official campaign programs that is referring to climate change. They have a program on climate change. They have a clear stance on climate change. And what is also adding to that is that Germany has experienced severe flooding here in July, with lots of people losing their homes, lots of people being displaced. And in response to that, we also had the top candidates traveling to these areas and doing basically quite a bit of a media tour there. So lots of exposure, lots of personal connection also of people now really having climate change on top of their minds. On top of that, of course, climate change and the conversation here in Germany has been going on for a longer time. Fridays for Future, for example, is very prominent here. So I do think it is one of the key issues that Germans are thinking about when they're going to the polls.
Yeah.
I mean, if I may,
Yeah.
it's not so much a polarizing issue. There's all parties except one agreeing that there is man-made climate change and that something has to be done, although the levels of what they want to do is varying. But there's only the AfD with lots of politicians saying that there is no man-made climate change, and this is no polarizing issue. It's an issue of the far right not agreeing with science, basically.
You said, Caroline, you said earlier on that I think AfD has some of the biggest share of voice on social media platforms in Germany. Is that so? That would suggest that they are, even though their poll ratings are low, they nevertheless are finding an audience for a social media audience for what they're saying.
That's right. They do receive the most interactions. One thing, because they have a lot of followers there, and they are really active in comparison to most of the other parties who are sometimes still struggling with what they want to do on social media, even though we've been here for a while. And one of the things that is also there is that they are relying on a small number of topics serving to emotionalize their supporters. So these interactions come because their supporters are being mad or angry or sad or are being scared by what kind of content is being posted by these parties. So different things really contributing to this fact.
I want to add, if I may, Damian, I just want to add that I think it's absolutely important, as Caroline said, to look at how AfD proactively kind of exploit social media, how their supporter base may also have like different social media consumption habits. But at the same time, it's also very important, I think, to look at governance gaps on the part of tech platforms, tech companies. And one thing, for instance, that we've been seeing in Germany for years is that Facebook, for instance, gives the AfD a free pass to violate all of its rules on coordinated inauthentic behavior, as Facebook calls it, basically using spam accounts paid for likes and engagement at massive scale to artificially also boost their content in the news feeds. It's not only that AfD followers are more active, which is also the case for sure. At the same time, of course, and as we all know, because of a fundamental lack of transparency when it comes to algorithmic recommender systems, all of that, but it is very, very valid to assume that Facebook intrinsically privileges AfD content in its recommender systems over, let's say, more factual news coverage, and often I think also campaign content by other parties, that it's just has, so to say, a competitive advantage over other political currents.
Yeah. But it seems that from what you say, in Germany as elsewhere, that more extreme content drives engagement, and therefore Facebook favor the engagement rather than being concerned about the impact this campaigning is having. Do you there is, I mean, after the
yes,
yeah, I mean, after the last presidential election in France, there was the President Macron's government had a serious look at social media legislation and regulation around harmful content. Obviously, in Germany, you've had the NetzDG law for some time now in force online, and I've spoken to German politicians who a couple of years ago who were thinking about the responsibilities that should be placed on social media influencers who are involved in political discourse. Do you think that the next German government will continue to look actively at social media regulation in Germany? Do you think there is a appetite to do as the UK is doing and creating specific sort of online safety legislation?
So, I mean, we have a legislative proposal at EU level. The question is currently more: will the German government let go of this NetzDG, the German hate speech law, gracefully in order to endorse and encourage strong EU-level systemic regulation, which I think is absolutely desirable. I mean, all evidence shows that NetzDG doesn't work. It's not protecting individuals, nor is it protecting democratic processes from large-scale hate campaigns. We did an experiment last week together with Süddeutsche Zeitung and an NGO called Hate Aid in Germany, where we actually reported several hundreds of clearly, unambiguously illegal comments, both under Facebook's own community standards, but also under the regulatory kind of channels of NetzDG. And in both cases, or in neither of the cases, Facebook even responded to more than 2/3 of the flagged content. And that's only basically the content that was proactively flagged by citizens. So that's the only case where there's even any form of liability or responsibility for that illegal content on the platform. For the other, let's say 90% or 95%, I don't know how much it is, there is no accountability whatsoever. And what we also noted as we reported all of that stuff, that this sample we used had been on the platform for over 400 days on average. So, I mean, all damage is done at that stage. And we're not talking about borderline cases. I'm talking about swastikas and like Heil Hitler, stuff like that, that is so unambiguously illegal in Germany. There's absolutely like no shades of gray about it. So I am absolutely convinced that this regulatory approach that is only focused on content removal doesn't do the job. It doesn't protect anyone. We really need ex ante preemptive regulation, and we need the ability for independent regulators to intervene and tell the platforms to discontinue practices that threaten to undermine fundamental rights, public security, or the rights of individuals.
Absolutely. I'm going to welcome all your views on this point. I mean, I've often cited, as many people have, a Facebook study that showed, I think it was done in 2016, that showed that 60% of people that joined Facebook groups promoting extremist content did so at the platform's active recommendation. I believe actually the study itself, which was an internal Facebook study they kept secret until someone leaked it, was actually a field study based on Germany, actually, rather than looking at it globally. I mean, do you think this is, given what you said about NetzDG, Felix, this is an active problem? It's not just that people post bad stuff that should be removed. It's that the platforms are actively driving people to more extreme content because it drives engagement.
I think that's absolutely the case. And there has been so much like cutting edge scientific research on that. Just from our like more recent, more almost anecdotal investigations, we can like again confirm that perception. I think that from all the political party pages that we investigated, AfD pages by far contained most illegal hate speech in the comment sections. It was absolutely inhumane and mind-blowing to see the volumes of vicious and illegal content like incitement of violence, calls to rape politicians, disgusting misogynist content at large scale. And it's precisely those pages, again, that Facebook most frequently recommends to their users, which is, in my view, unethical for a range of reasons, not only because they amplify illegal content, but also because they interfere in the election campaign by kind of giving one party a head start over others online, as we just discussed before.
And it's interesting. I think it's really interesting because what we hear in the UK, and you hear this in America a lot, is the social media companies say, well, we want to, tell us when it's illegal, tell us what we've got to remove, and actually what you've got in Germany is you have got a law that says this category of content that, celebrates Nazi ideology is illegal, has to be removed, but yet they're still not doing it.
Yeah, and I think we are also opening up the can of worms of content that is harmful but not illegal. And I think that is still something that we see on social media. It's flourishing on social media. Often it's not necessarily illegal content, but still something that Germans are concerned about. And I think that's also very much the UK approach right now with the online safety regulation. I think it's also about not just creating incentives for social media platforms to become more proactive about harmful categories of content. And I think it's to use a metaphor that many have used before. It's about not just treating the symptoms, not just removing the misinformation and the pieces of harmful content, but it's about actually fighting the malady that's behind it. So why is it that we have the very emotional, the very controversial, that kind of content trending? Why is that spreading so virally, and why not the factual information and the pictures of family and friends that people supposedly want to see on social media?
Yeah, and I mean, as someone who's works in academic research, how easy do you find it to work with the social media companies and get information from them to support research projects? I mean, on the whole, I think people find it a pretty frustrating process. If you found the secret formula, then we'd all love to hear it. But I mean, I think one of the common aspects of both the UK's online safety bill and also the EU's Digital Services Act is the idea there has to be proper accountability. The systems have to be opened up to allow proper academic research.
Yeah, so I'm sure your audience knows this is one of the big problems of research and also of civil society research, is how to get the data from social media platforms. I think social media platforms have been holding back on sharing data. There are concerns about privacy. There are concerns about user safety and security, but a lot of it is also simply not being shared for opaque reasons. There have been some proposals to make data sharing more accessible with researchers. For example, Facebook had Social Science One, which was a big attempt to share more data with researchers. That then, however, hasn't quite materialized. And then also some of the avenues that researchers used to have, which were public APIs, have become less accessible over the years. So I think we right now are in more or less the situation where we were in 2016. We don't have access to data. We don't have access to public data. So it's not data that is something like private messages, but it's public likes. It is public things that are being posted to social media that we do not have an account of, a picture of. And that, of course, makes it really hard to conduct research. And it also makes it impossible to conduct research about the impact that this is all having. If we don't know who has seen something, we don't know how it's impacted someone. And I think without having this essence, the impact, regulation is also going to have a difficult argument to say, okay, we know we have misinformation and we think it is impacting democratic processes in this and that ways. It's an argument that's impossible to make.
Now, just looking at the going back to the German election. I mean, Carolyn, how does sort of politics in Europe look from the perspective of Germany? Because we've seen the rise of populist parties into government in many European countries now, including big countries like Italy. We've seen, and in the first show in this series, we discussed with Christiel and Anne Applebaum the undermining of democratic institutions in countries like Hungary and Poland, and almost the emergence of a form of one-party government. How do German voters look at the issues in these countries that are right on your doorstep?
I mean, it's hard to say. Some are worried about it, obviously, and there's also this kind of narrative in Germany. I often hear that this cannot happen here for whatever reason. I don't think that's the case. We've seen it in many European countries and around the world, and I don't think anyone is really safe from these kinds of developments. So I think that is something we need to move away from, definitely. And we see that even though we don't have a far-right government, there's still a lot of harm that could be done. And with the next government and with the next parliamentary period, the AfD will receive more money because they have set up their own political foundation. And we'll see what happens then, because there's obviously millions of euros they will have for all kinds of campaigns and setting up their own whatever it's going to be. Really, some of it will definitely be dedicated to online work, and we'll see what this is going to lead to. But I'm pretty worried about that. And this narrative of being immune is something that always bugs me a lot about how we're talking about these things in Germany.
But I wanted to get back for a second to this issue of data access for public interest research, which we all agree is absolutely fundamental to guarantee transparency, accountability, and to enable society to identify and measure online harms. Because Lisa Maria mentioned this infamous flagship data sharing initiative called Social Science One. And I just wanted to add that this initiative didn't just not materialize, it was all the leading academics, professors on it withdrawing from it with a public statement, because they said that the companies had basically been cynically gaslighting them, and there was never any genuine intention whatsoever to make that data available to them. So they were basically wasting their time. And we can only confirm that, of course, once again, here looking now at our recent experiences around the German elections. We had two of our partner organizations building up pretty exciting research projects to make online election ads more transparent. One was run by the New York University. The other one was run by Algorithm Watch, a German think tank. And both of these projects had to be discontinued because Facebook, at a whim, basically decided to delete the Facebook accounts for those researchers, so they could no longer run their projects. And that was extremely frustrating to a lot of people, and it certainly hasn't contributed to making this particular digital election campaign more transparent for citizens, for researchers, or for anyone.
Yeah, I think it's a really good example, again, I think, of how disingenuous it is of the social media companies to say that they welcome that scrutiny, they welcome sort of examination of how their tools and systems work, but actually they close down independent scrutiny, and they largely want us to rely on their own self-declared data. Carolyn, you said do you think sometimes there's a view people have in Germany, which is they look at what's happening in countries like Poland and Hungary and say that could never happen here. I'd just be interested, before we close, just to talk about that a bit more, because I certainly think, say from the perspective of the UK, what I think social media has done, it has given license to more extreme opinions. It has created an environment where people can say things and behave in a way that they probably wouldn't have behaved in the real world. And of course, the danger is that the more familiar and more accessible that becomes on social media, the more that changes their real world behaviors in the end. And do you think that is happening in Germany? Do you think social media is giving license to people to hold and express more extreme opinions?
I think so, yeah. I mean, for one, people are not receiving any sanctions for doing outrageous stuff online, and this moves offline all the time. I mean, I've been speaking at public events before this pandemic, but I've been harassed there, and I've received death threats with like people's home addresses in these emails. And currently we have this thing going on that people online are calling for people to attend offline events of politicians, mainly from the far right, but also conspiracy theorists and COVID deniers are calling for these, for their supporters to go there. And you see all the time that there are videos taken there of people being harassed and being the German health minister being harassed for being gay, for example. There's all kinds of really bad things moving from online to offline. It's a continuum. It's not a separate spaces. It's just people who say these things online will say these at public events too.
Yeah, I think we haven't even started to talk about the German Querdenker movement today. So Querdenker, COVID denier movement that Kaselin has already mentioned. And this is a movement that basically has materialized online, and where we see a lot of the conversation, a lot of the organizing is actually happening online. Telegram here is really important. German Telegram, a lot of these groups are publicly accessible. So you can actually, as a researcher, go online and lurk into public conversations and see what is going on and how people are organizing. And we've seen protests. We've seen a lot of people boycotting all sorts of COVID restriction measures and actively protesting them. And I think this is a perfect example for there is no dichotomy between online and offline world.
And I mean, Felix, I know you've previously looked at research on vaccine hesitancy, for people less likely to be vaccinated. I think that was actually during COVID, that was a pretty good barometer of how well disinformation around the vaccine was doing, because there seemed to be a continuing shift of opinion against the vaccine until the vaccine itself actually arrived and people started taking it.
That's absolutely correct. And I mean, we all know that there has been anti-vax movements and vaccine hesitancy before this pandemic. And that certainly, I mean, the current anti-vax movements are basically just, starting a new phase maybe of that. That being said, I am absolutely convinced that Facebook in Germany, because of their unique reach, have a particular responsibility in amplifying that kind of content, locking people into echo chambers where they don't access any alternative, any accurate information about this stuff, and where they fail to actually enforce, even though I think that's a word terminology that's the privilege of states, not of private companies, but where they don't kind of implement their own content policies that they use here in Brussels, where I am today, to go around and soothe policymakers with. So I remember a few figures seeing that I think, what was it, 2 or 3 million Germans alone were members of Facebook groups in which the vaccine was equated with the Holocaust. And monetizing this kind of content, generating engagement and ultimately ad revenue with this kind of content, I don't know how these people, I know it sounds extreme, but how they can look in the mirror.
Yeah. It's interesting because the Holocaust, people in the UK have started, some people, admittedly, you see online, started posting comments comparing the idea of vaccine passports to yellow stars that were worn during the Holocaust, which is pretty unpleasant comparison, but interesting that language has seeped in that way. I mean, do you think in Germany there's evidence of what we've seen elsewhere too, of conspiracy networks moving between topics? So they may talk about immigration one day, they may talk about climate change denial the next, they may talk about anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. They're moving between topics, but they're driving those narratives probably at a common audience.
If I may?
Yeah, of course, Carolyn. Yeah.
That's definitely something we can see. It's not only QAnon, which has a huge base in Germany as well, and we haven't even tackled that. But even within the COVID denier movement, you see there are protagonists there who have organized demonstrations, moving on to spreading false claims about the US election and there being election fraud. They also covered the floods. Some of them even went there to help and also promoting their ideologies. There was all kinds of conspiracy narratives around the flood itself. Climate change, again, is something they have moved on to as well. So as the research shows, actually, people move on from one conspiracy theory to the next one, and they have done that in the past few months and weeks since the vaccine hasn't killed everybody just like they said they would.
And if just before we bring our discussion to a close, I just wanted to just ask about the response of, if you like, the traditional media, or what Donald Trump would call the mainstream media in Germany, to the rise of populism and social media politics. I mean, Felix, you mentioned Axel Springer earlier. I saw they've I think they're just doing a deal to buy Politico and want to be the biggest sort of online news publisher. I mean, how is traditional media in Germany responding to the rise of social media?
What I think is Germany's key strength and probably makes Germany more resilient towards disinformation than a lot of other countries is firstly our particular voting system, our political system. It's very, as I said, very consensus driven. It's proportionate, not majoritarian. And at the same time, our public broadcasters who have very, very wide penetration and who enjoy extraordinary levels of trust with audiences in Germany. So I think both those are kind of bastions against disinformation. That being said, I find it a little bit worrying to see that more and more mainstream media are kind of increasingly adapting to the attention maximization logics of social media. And even if we look at Bild Zeitung, who just started their own TV channel, for instance, adopting the style and approach of Fox News in America, some would say, for instance. I find that a bit worrying.
Carolyn, what are your thoughts?
I completely agree, and there's high levels of trust. I do also think that this new Bild TV channel might not be as influential in this election, but it's not going away anytime soon. So as it is with disinformation and trust in institutions, you have to look at what it does in the long run and not only before elections or shortly after. I think this is a problem of the German media, actually, that we don't cover these topics continuously. Is it disinformation or conspiracy theories? It's often this kind of topic you address before the election, but these narratives about postal voting have been around in Germany for this election since October last year, and we should have done something about it. And the same goes for, let's say, the pandemic and all kinds of falsehoods being spread right now. I don't see a lot of coverage of these things. We have to be careful about what we cover as journalists, but definitely there could be done more, and there could be more pre-bunking, for example. And I'm pretty worried about what this is going to mean for more climate change coming soon, and journalists not being prepared for what this means in the disinformation space as well.
Yeah, I want to come in on that too. I think we do have that trust within the broad public right now, but we also already see that large parts of the population actually are having more distrust, especially also over the public broadcasters. And I think one of the issues that we're seeing here that is connected to that is that there have been a couple of moments over the past years or even past months where people, for example, from the extremist right wing or also from the Querdenker movement had that moment of, oh, we actually had it right all to begin with. And that lying press, die Lügenpresse, has been lying to us yet again. I think we've had that moment, for example, when it came to vaccines and when it came to AstraZeneca. That was something where we've seen the Querdenker movement saying, oh, we've told you all along, this is very dangerous. And the media has just been saying to you, it's safe, it's safe, it's safe. And then now all of a sudden we saw it isn't safe. And now they have to actually show face and tell you the truth about it. And I think we've seen a couple of moments like that. And that is definitely not helping overall trust in public media.
But I suppose what you're saying there, it sounds like it ends up becoming an attack on experts, an attack on the establishment, that you basically can't trust what the establishment tells you because they're keeping stuff from you. Whether that's on COVID or climate change or any other issue.
That's absolutely right. I think that's as a scholar, that's actually one of the signs of populism, which is always anti-the elites, anti whoever is on top of the system, and it's always them against us. And of course, that has to do with political experts, that has to do with politicians, it has to do with the media. And it is something that we've seen for a long time that isn't going to go away. And interestingly, we're also seeing the same kind of patterns, the same kind of narratives materializing in a lot of political systems, not just in Germany. And the role that social media plays in that, I think, can't be neglected.
Absolutely. Well, a very important note on which to finish. So Carolyn, Felix, Lisa Maria, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast.
Thank you, Damian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thank you. You've been listening to the Infotagion podcast, hosted by me, Damian Collins, and featuring Carolyn Schwartz, Felix Kart, and Lisa Marie Neudert. The show was produced by David Dargahi. You can find out more about Infotagion by visiting our website, infotagion.com. And you can also support this show by becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/Infotagion podcast. Infotagion is a not-for-profit organization, and any funds we receive go into the making of this show. Thank you. Until next time.